So here we are, expanding the communicative competence of the pre-symbolic learner. Last week, we really focused on the assessment of that pre-symbolic learner using the communication matrix. So before we move forward, I wanted to check back with you guys and make sure that you're all feeling pretty comfortable with that, and perhaps even had a chance to go and visit the website, communicationmatrix.org. So I'll just pause for a second in case there are questions from last week's discussion. All right. Okay, if I've given you enough time, but Tessa will read anything or interrupt and let you guys say what you wanted to say. Let's move forward. Just by way of review here, take a few minutes and use your notes if you need to, and take this one message, I'm hungry, and think about, jot down how a learner might express that very message at all 7 levels as the matrix has described it. In other words, how might a child at level 1, I have born, express this message, and so on and so forth. How might a child at level 6, level 7, so on and so forth. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that.
Bang on the desk, use the words, sign food.
All right, and so banging on the desk would be what level? Signing food is a pretty easy one. That would be level 6, wouldn't it? Abstract, symbolic, single word utterances.
She says, this part I'm not so good at.
Okay, banging on the desk. That's a great example. I'm sure we all have seen it. There is purposeful behavior, not necessarily an effort on the part of the learner to direct that behavior to another person, a communication partner. And to some extent, it's unclear as to what the reason is behind the banging on the desk. So we, as the communication partner, are going to interpret that behavior. We're going to assign meaning to it. And we're going to take the role of the communication partner. So that really does sound like a level 2 behavior, purposeful behavior, but not yet directed to somebody with an intended meaning. All right? How might a child at level 3 do that? How might he express this? I'm hungry.
Take you to and show you what they want.
Yep, nice example. Very good. So hand guiding. These are considered unconventional gestures, meaning that likely you and I, although we use gestures, probably wouldn't use that particular one. We would use more distal sorts of gestures like pointing or alternating gaze, those sorts of things. Hand guiding, very effective, yet considered somewhat unconventional. Great. Nice example.
Philip, which handout shows the levels?
Which handout? 7 levels communicative competence, I believe, is the handout that you want. Also, the PowerPoints from session 1 will have each of the 7 levels. All right? Any other examples? Any other? How might a child at level 5 do this? How might he express or she express, I'm hungry? Remember, level 5 talks about concrete symbolic.
Hand you a plate or spoon?
Yes and no. Handing you a plate or a spoon, that plate or that spoon is still part of the actual object, if you will. It's likely the spoon that he eats with, or the plate that he eats on. And so, yes, those things are associated, but they have not yet taken on symbolic value totally. Does that make sense? It's a step in the right direction for sure. But perhaps a spoon or a part of a spoon affixed to a card or a picture of a plate, those would be of concrete symbolic. Those have representational value, okay? They stand for, but they're not part of the actual act of eating in this case. Very good, though. Good examples. All right, let's move on. So last week we talked about finding out what that learner understands about the world around him and how he relates to it. That's assessment. Now we're going to build on that. That's intervention. Doing something with that information that we have gathered through the assessment process. Building on those levels of competency rather than on all the deficits that perhaps our assessment showed up or revealed. All right? And I realized this statement was made in 1998. So my question to you is, does this statement still have relevance today? So what are they suggesting here? And do you think it's still relevant?
I still find it to be true in many instances today. I see this take place in my own classroom as new students come in and the team begins to try and establish communication.
Very good. So what they're suggesting, as I see it, is that we attempt early on to establish some symbolic form of communication without really assessing whether or not that individual understands the basic elements of communication, such as turn-taking or the role of other people as communication partners. Those very things that we talked about last week, those foundational, very early pre-symbolic sorts of communicative competencies. And so, yeah, I would agree with you. Unfortunately, oftentimes still shoot, or we go right to that fourth element of means of expression without really giving fair consideration to whether or not that learner understands the other elements, whether or not that learner understands that he has the ability to affect change, whether or not he understands that he needs to engage another person in order to be a successful communicator, and whether or not he has something to communicate about, enough world experience to give him topic. So yeah, unfortunately, I think this statement is still true in many instances today. So if we're going to talk about setting goals, building on what we've discovered about that learner's competencies through the assessment, one question is obviously what level of communicative competence are you going to target? With the matrix, you have 7 levels to choose from. And the reality is probably be more. So my question to you would be, what level do they seem to be functioning at or operating at most readily and most consistently? And within each level, we have those individual communicative functions or intents. What are you going to target there? Okay. To give you a little bit of help there on that last question, what functions or intents, we would propose this. Some of the most important communicative intents to address early on would be those of gaining attention, reinstating an interaction that they like that has been introduced by somebody else, making requests or choice making, and obviously too, protesting, being able to refuse and protest something that has been put off them. If you look at the Communication Bill of Rights, developed by the National Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities, it reads that all people with a disability of any extent or severity have a basic right to affect through communication the conditions of their existence. All people have the following specific communication rights in their daily interactions. Those include requesting desired objects, actions, events, and people, refusing undesired objects, actions, or events, expressing personal preferences, and requesting and receiving another person's attention and interaction. Okay, those would be at the top of our list of priorities. Where to begin? Start teaching communication. Isn't yes, no the most basic skill? Surprisingly, no, it's not, according to Cynthia Kress. Yes, no tends to be a later developing skill since those words can have a wide variety of meanings. Yes, no tends to reinforce passive responding rather than active functional communicating. Earlier functions may include greetings, protests, requests for attention or objects, more, all done. So, and how many of you have seen yes-no systems put into place long before a learner is ready to even comprehend the words that are being put to him in the form of a question? Okay? And as far as that passivity, I had a student several years back who had a vocabulary of 67 single words using pictures. His teacher and speech pathologist at the new school took this system away from him and decided that it would be easier for them if they developed with him a yes-no system. So what did that do to this guy? Yes-no tends to reinforce passive responding rather than active functional communicating. This young man stopped initiating communication interactions, and he sat around, learned to sit around and wait for other people to come up and ask him questions. That's not a functional communication system in my estimation. Okay, where to target communication opportunities? But if you have to prioritize, I would suggest that you choose those situations where the child's interests are the greatest. Those situations and those opportunities that are valued most by the learner and his or her family. And those situations where you can ensure the most consistency from the social environment. Predictable routines are necessary before we can expect our learner to indicate a desire to reinstate such interactions. It's through that predictability that our learners begin to be able to anticipate what it is that they're supposed to do to fill their role, and to anticipate what it is that you're going to do when they engage you. Okay, so motivation and consistency, very, very important considerations. Functional communication is unlikely to occur unless the learner has extensive opportunities to communicate across a wide variety of real-life experiences. Okay, so I'm not sitting here advocating that we adopt a milieu approach and embedding communication opportunities only within the context of the natural environment. I think for our learners, that strategy alone may not necessarily ensure adequate practice for them to develop the skill. Instead, I would suggest that perhaps we provide a combination of the two, where we provide intense practice to rehearse and develop the skills that they need to communicate, but also ensuring that they have ample opportunity to get and become more competent and fluid in their use of that communication skill. I've included this form in your handouts, and it's there for you to at least consider if you want. I use this to negotiate with classrooms as to where it is that they feel, from the child's perspective, some reinforcing opportunities to communicate might exist within that learner's day. If you look at it, it's all driven by that student's or that teacher's daily schedule. I get it. I know how important those things are. Okay. So within each activity of that daily schedule, I'm asking simply, who's the communication partner? What are the materials used within that activity? And are any of those materials, those topics, potential topics, or if you answer no throughout the day, then it should come as no surprise that that learner may not be very interested in communicating except to protest. But if you answer, yeah, you know what, this particular activity or these particular activities are highly motivating to this learner, boom. That's where I would begin to really focus my energies, if I have to choose, focus my energies on where to embed those opportunities to communicate. So again, this is simply included in your handouts for your consideration, okay? At this point, I want you guys to take a moment and think about these 4 statements here. And think about your students. And pick a student and stay a student. Because as we move forward now, we're going to be talking about interventions as they relate to each one of these 4 levels. And to make this really practical and meaningful and something you can go back and use quickly in your own classrooms, perhaps it'll help to be able to identify a particular child and think and pay more strict attention to the sorts of ideas and objectives that we're describing for a learner at that level, okay? So if any of you've done this now, picked a student and described a level, perhaps you'd share that with us so that I have a better sense of the types of learners that you folks are dealing with in your classrooms.
I can think of a student for each of these statements, but the one that is most challenging is a student that falls into level 1.
You bet. All right. All right. So I would encourage you then to pay real close attention to the following discussions, because that's where we're going to begin. We're going to be talking about our learners at level 1. And I would just add this. The child doesn't seem control over his body yet. What I'm going to suggest instead is that perhaps he may very well, or she may very well have volitional behavior, have purposeful behavior. But I am struggling as a potential communication partner to identify that behavior. And if I can't identify it, then I'm not going to be able to respond to it consistently. And if I can't respond to it consistently, then that learner is going to have a hard time figuring out that I want to communicate with him, that I get him, that I understand him, okay? So it's shifting the onus back on me as the communication partner. I need to create an environment for this learner that is more contingently responsive to him. And in order to do that, I need to identify a behavior like be can do consistently and readily. Okay? Anybody else?
The student I work with primarily between C and D. She speaks
All right.
clearly, but has to be motivated to speak and often provided with words to articulate needs following using behaviors, pointing, taking me to, etc.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
She doesn't yet understand yes and no yet very well and often confuses them.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Me too. Well, good, because I wouldn't start with yes and no anyway. So that's all right. That's all right. But have, well, let's not solve it yet. Let's get into it. So great. We will be talking about children who are, as level 3 is describing, demonstrating that intent to communicate. But as you're saying, this child is struggling to make that transition into statement D, or level 5, 6, or 7, that symbolic form of communication. Okay, great. Let's move on. Thank you, guys. So you also have this objectives worksheet. So as you have identified or think about a particular child, I want you to go ahead and jot down specific notes as it relates to sender behavior, receiver behavior, anything with regards to topic or means of expression, okay, that we discuss in the levels here. And in the end, write down an objective, because we will be sharing objectives, our ideas for objectives for students at each of these levels. And you also have another handout with other possible objectives for your consideration as they relate to each of these levels here. Okay? So this is a little bit of a sheet to have in front of you as we go through this, so you can jot down some notes. Again, this isn't going to be collected. It's simply to give you some way to begin to formulate a plan for a particular child in your classroom, and make this whole discussion and these whole 6 hours, not all today, of course, but the 6 hours on this topic meaningful to you. All right. Level 1. This is what we know about our level 1 learner. Demonstrating spontaneous, albeit reflexive or reactive behavior. We call this partner perceived communication, because at this stage, the partner is assigning meaning to that child's behavior. Our level 1 learner primarily cries to indicate some form of discomfort. We don't know why they're uncomfortable. We play the 20 questions until we figure it out. Similarly, they may express contentment. And again, we play 20 questions to try to figure out why they're so happy at this moment. The focus of our intervention is to establish a purposeful behavior by creating highly responsive environments. Potential goals for learners at this level include that sender, that child, maintain or his alert states for learning. In other words, emotional regulation. Because what we do know is that if our learner is crying or fussing, or is sleeping or drowsy, he's not available for learning. And lots of our kids at this level, particularly, are struggling to maintain a presence, okay? Maintain an availability for learning. Increase sender awareness of or attention to topics and interactions with receivers. Okay, another goal for our sender. And that would be easily measured. If right now their attention to either interactions with us or to various topics that we introduce are fleeting, then again, establish what they look like, how long generally do they attend, and begin to spend more time focusing on increasing that attention to and interest in a variety of different topics and interactions with us. That our learner will demonstrate detectable and doable means, okay? Demonstrate a purposeful behavior, in other words. And finally, that our learner demonstrate contingency awareness, that they show through their behavior their understanding of their ability to affect change in their environment, okay? To cause things to happen. And we'll show you what that looks like. As far as arousal states, I'm sure most of you guys have seen this. And it ranges from asleep all the way down to crying and agitated. If you look at that list, where do you think our learner is in available learning?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. If you look at this list of 6 different states, as Brazelton and et al. Have referred to them, where do you know is available for learning? Is it when he's asleep or crying or pitching a fit, or when he's quiet or active alert?
Active alert.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of our learners spend a lot of time in between these different states. And they're struggling to arrive at and maintain that quiet alert, active alert place. And sometimes it's because of medications. Sometimes it's because of uncontrolled seizures. Sometimes it's simply a matter of their inability by themselves to regulate their states. They need our help. Okay. Here's a form that's in your handout. And we use this to begin to determine what are the conditions that most often seem to correspond to or correlate with those states of quiet alert or active alert. Okay? If we can begin to get a handle on that, we can then make a hypothesis about, okay, since there's a strong correlation between these different, whether it's position or social conditions or specific stimuli, that we can increase those conditions throughout the day and thereby increase that child's active alert or quiet alert state. All right. So let me give you an example. A young guy named Tommy. We did an observation, a time sampling observation of this youngster, okay? What we discovered was that out of a 5.5-hour school day, he was spending approximately 20 minutes available for learning. And that's not a block of time. That was 2 minutes here, a minute here, 5 minutes here, okay, throughout the day. What we discovered was those times that he was most ready for learning, those active alert, quiet alert times, seemed to have specific characteristics about them. And we then attempted to increase those characteristics, to replicate those characteristics more often throughout the day. By the end of the school year, we did the same observation again. And what we discovered was that this youngster was now spending approximately 2.5 hours out of a 5-hour day ready for learning, okay? One of the other questions about our learners is what sorts of things might motivate them? What sorts of things do they show interest in, okay? We have to include the family in that inquiry, okay? We have to include other team members in that problem solving, okay? We may have to use forms like this in our interviewing and looking at what the child might like or might show some aversion or dislike for. And as you can see, this ranges across smells, touch, movement, vibrations, all sorts of things, okay? Beginning to assess the child across a variety of different stimuli through different sensory channels. Begin to those things that might be of interest to our learner, that they might show some awareness of and potential motivation for, okay? And of all else, there's always this strategy here, which is a much more labor-intensive observational form or technique again, designed to learn to figure out what sorts of stimuli, what sorts of sensory channels that learner is most responsive to, and the sorts of things within that, those that sensory channel that he is showing the greatest interest in. And then what sorts of behaviors he seems to most readily use to indicate that interest or awareness of, all right? There's an example. I'm not going to even attempt to go through all of this, but in the end, we're looking at a variety of different stimuli, as well as a variety of different behaviors that child demonstrates, and with the hopes of pairing those behaviors with these stimuli in a response contingent arrangement. And I'll show you what that looks like, okay? But our questions are this. The things we're looking for answers for are these. What does your child show the greatest reaction to? Is there a clear difference in the student's behavior when you pause in the interaction? Does this difference in behavior suggest that they like or dislike the toy or interaction? What objects and interactions appear to cause the most positive reactions? Okay. We're also asking questions about the student's behavior, motor behavior. What behaviors occur most frequently, and so on and so forth. Okay. That struggle to show their interest in and fulfill their role in this partner-child interaction. Maternal responsivity does not function independently of, and I can't see my, I'm gonna move these. I'm having trouble reading that. Independently of the child's behavior and responsiveness. Either partner in the dance between parent and child is capable of disrupting the interaction. All right? Suggesting that the child is really taking cues off the parent is really taking cues off the child. Either one of those, failing to perceive a response from the other person, is probably quit attempts to engage or to respond. Does that make sense? Peter's mom is faced with the challenge of learning to interpret different signals, of having to increase her attention to what she perceives as Peter's attempts to initiate an interaction, as well as to create new opportunities for interactive episodes, okay? And she did a masterful job at this. Remember, Peter is visually impaired and hearing impaired. He has uncontrolled seizures. He's 11 months old here. He has uncontrolled seizures, and he's heavily medicated. And yet, mom was able to accomplish this. She was able, through her interaction and expectations, to discover that Peter, in fact, does like it when she tickles him in the cheek, on the cheek. And when she pauses, he would do something, i.e., turn towards her, and she would tickle him again. And by doing that, she increased the rate of behavior from Peter. In other words, Peter was learning that when I do this, I get more of this, okay? Same thing with arm play. Same thing with shaking in the tumble form. What he didn't like particularly was a towel on the face. And he similarly learned that if I don't do this, mom's gonna stop, okay? This is Peter's first vocabulary. And it all happened because mom was creative and consistent and predictable in her interactions with Peter. And Peter, as a result, figured out that this is what I do to what I need to stop doing, and she'll stop doing towel on the face. Okay. So children at this level oftentimes present themselves as this: children whose means of engaging and acting on their world is greatly restricted. It's restricted by their sensory limitations, by their motor limitations, by their access to people and access to things in their world. Okay? Absolutely. So what do we do? These are oftentimes they present as our level 1 kids. Okay? Problem is that a profound lack of perceived control over the environment may result in the loss of motivation to affect change in the world. You all know this. You've all heard about Martin Seligman's theory on learned helplessness. And I'm guessing that some of you have even seen results of this. It is trying to affect the world around them. Yeah? You bet. We can't let that happen. The upside is for our children, if they figure out that their behavior matters, it's going to prepare the child to demonstrate learning and subsequent opportunities of response contingent learning. They are going to take what they've learned about themselves and apply it to other situations throughout their day. And in fact, for many of these guys, it's going to become the motivation to explore. It's not so much that I hit the drum and the drum makes a noise. It's that, look what I can cause to happen. I wonder what else happens if I do this. I wonder what happens if I do this. It is simply that discovery. It is that seeking out other opportunities to affect the change that becomes the driver for these guys. That's what we want to happen. Okay. And oftentimes we use the micro switch technology, you know, those single switches, the big red switches, whatever kinds of switches you guys use. I'm sure you all use them, right? Do you know why you're using them? Sometimes we use them because we call it partial participation. But the switch is not a panacea, okay? It's not a replacement for something. It's a means to an end, okay? And there are some bona fide reasons for doing it. We may use the technology as a way to provide our kids access to recreational and leisure opportunities, or to teach motor skills, to teach cognitive skills. The operative word there is teach, you guys. Not just placate, not just babysit, not just give them something to do while we go do something else. This technology with it for a reason. Okay? And that reason will lead to a next step. Okay? The uses would allow our learner to control his physical environment, or to participate in a regular activity, okay? Or to access a communication device. But the misuses are when there's no clear functional objective for using them, or when their use diverts attention from the purpose for which they were designed, or when the switch and quote-unquote independent play it results in becomes an excuse to ignore the user. And I'm sorry, I'm not being sarcastic here. I've seen this, and it's frustrating, and it's not appropriate. It's not an appropriate use of the technology. It's not an appropriate use of time, and it's not teaching. The desired outcome of the technology is to assist the children to develop and use behaviors to control their social environment from a communication standpoint, and assist the environment to become more contingently responsive to the child's communicative behaviors. If somehow we can use this technology to tap into some otherwise subtle, too subtle behaviors from our learners, such that we can now detect them and respond to them consistently, that's teaching. And that's helping that child connect himself to the world around him, because it's helping him figure out that, wow, look what I can cause to happen. Okay? How do you know it's happening? You're gathering objective measures of the child's performance. You're looking at this performance over time, and you're also gathering collateral emotional responses. Okay? I'm not going to go through this, but this is a checklist. These are some questions to consider. This was written back in 1985. And I think it's worth worth discussing, worth thinking about even today. Is the reason for using this technology educationally valid? Could it be taught directly without adaptation? And if you're going to use the technology, what type of switch are you going to use? What are the demands of that switch? What position is that child? What's the behavior he's using to activate that? What kind of data are you collecting and how are you monitoring? And then finally, what are the next steps? Okay. Here's has a tilt switch, otherwise known as a mercury switch, embedded in that headband on her, around her head. And every time she raises her head, that mirror goes off, the light around the mirror goes off, and her favorite person in the whole world comes over and talks to her and pats her back, strokes her back, okay? So as long as this child's head stays up, that light stays on, and her favorite person stays right there attending to her. But when her head goes down, the mirror goes off, and her favorite person stops attending to her. So if this child is figuring out that I do this and this happens, and I like this, what would you predict about the rate of that behavior? What would you predict about how often that would stay up?
It will increase, and it will increase for sure.
It will increase for sure, yeah. And if I take it away, if I take away those reinforcers, what would you predict about the rate of the behavior?
Decrease.
You bet. You've just described an alternating treatment design, haven't you? You see that yellow line there? That yellow line depicts the duration of head-up behavior from this child as she learned what it was that she needed to do in order to get that reinforcement, okay? And then you look around January 24th on this graph here, and you see that the behavior, the yellow line, disappears. That's when we took away the reinforcement. And so on, and it jumps back up. That's when we added it back in, sorry. It's exactly what you just described. And this is a BAB design. But it's objective evidence using the technology that this child understands or has that cause and effect understanding, has that sense of that she can cause something to happen. So, if you know this about this learner, what would your next steps be? Because this is important. Where would you go next? What are you going to do with this discovery that you've just made about this learner? Any thoughts?
Yes, we have one. Start applying this to each behavior you want to see increase.
Okay. So try it with another behavior. That's one option. What else? So you know she'll do this for music or for that lighted mirror and social attention from this particular person. What other questions might you have now?
Also start to look for other motivators for communication.
Okay.
And Stacy says, what else will she do it for?
Okay. So now you have a way of that, don't you, Stacy? You have a way to actually assess that or answer that question. You could plug in a different reinforcer in place of that mirror or in place of that social reinforcement and answer your question by virtue of this behavior, right? Will her head come up? Will her head stay up as long for these other things as it has for what we know she does like now? Right? How about, will her head come up and stay up for another person? will she activate her switch to get the attention from another person? Okay. Here's an example of what we did. We asked the question, could she do this using a different behavior? I think one of you mentioned that, in a different position. Okay. Let me ask you this. If you know that this child is able to activate a switch and it results in getting attention from somebody else, what's the functional implications of that? What's the functional application of that? What does she now have from a communication standpoint?
They understand that what they are doing is affecting their environment. She is now able to get attention, a way to get someone's attention.
Yes, 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 yes. You bet. And we know how important having the attention of another person is in order to communicate, right? Effectively. If I don't have a communication partner, all my efforts are going to be for nothing. Yeah. So this is a very, very important early communication skill. And you guys have just described a bunch of really viable next steps. Okay. And you have a way to assess whether or not you've overstepped, you've shot too far, because you have an objective way to measure what her response will be. Okay. Nyland's another example of this, okay? This youngster. What we knew from our consult with OTs and PTs was that his best shot at a purposeful behavior was in this position. So we suspended a switch in front of him. And we were looking at how often he would activate that switch when nothing happened. And then we looked at how often he would activate that switch when he hit it, it resulted in social interaction from another person. Very similar to the Tiffany, the other child, okay? We're collecting data on switch activation, frequency of switch activation in this case. The other child was durational data, okay? Here's his data. Look at that. Do you think he figured out what it was he needed to do in order to get reinforcement from another person? You bet. You bet. Okay. This all happened in a 40-minute session. But one of our criteria is ability. So one day is not enough. We're going to look at this again and make sure that he can replicate this sort of performance. But like I asked you before, where would you go next? So what? You know this about Nyland now. So what? What are you going to do with it? What would your questions be now?
Stacy says the data shows that he did use it to build on other behaviors.
Okay, other behaviors again. What else?
Can he I think that's maybe activate, can he activate the switch to make choices between objects?
It's an interesting question. My question to you would be, what is his experience with those objects in order to become familiar with them? But yeah, could he use that behavior for other reinforcement other than social? It's another way to put that, I think. Anybody else?
Find out what other motivators he has to communicate.
Good. And you have a way to answer that by virtue of using this behavior as a measure, right? If we replace that social reinforcement with somebody else or with something else, and the rate of his switch activation goes down, would that objectively suggest to you that he is less interested or not interested or dislikes that? What we did, we looked at him in a different position. Can he do this for the same reinforcement, for the same social interaction, if we gave him less physical support? Can he do this if it's somebody other than Heather giving him that social reinforcement? Can he do this using a more refined movement? Okay. We have an objective way to measure this. We have a set of data to compare his performances to determine whether or not it's effective. Okay. Now in the classroom, he has to ask for a turn, just like everybody else during circle time. Now, he is not simply presented with the next bite. He gets to say, I'm ready for the next bite. Okay. Here he is in a totally new learning experience. Now he's in that mastery motivation phase here. He is looking for other opportunities to control. And he has a mercury switch embedded in these headphones, such that every time he raises his head, he's jamming, okay? He is listening to music, and he's loving it. And this is his data from a single 20-minute session. Yep. That's learning to learn, you guys. That's learning to learn. So the switches are great. The switches provide us a way to tap into subtle behaviors in our learners and begin to present an environment in a more contingently responsive way. They've got to be accompanied with questions and ways to answer those questions, okay? And plans for what's our next step, okay? This learner is using a 2-switch setup, and we've embedded or covered one switch with a texture that feels similar to the object or the toy in this case that it's causing to activate. Eventually, that learner will have the tactile presentation of that material along with another to make a choice from, okay? Here, she is able to indicate whether she wants a drink or another bite of food using the objects affixed to the various switches. Okay. So we'll just recap. We know at level 1 they are at a reflexive reactive stage. The role of the receiver at this point is to be highly sensitive, to be contingent in their responsiveness, and consistent in their responsiveness. Topics generally involve things that are immediate and having to do with sensory motor input. Means of expression, they have to be doable for the learner and detectable to us. Our goal is that the learner develop this contingency awareness or demonstrate that contingency awareness, that cause and effect. And doing so really lays the groundwork and eases them into that transition to level 2. Okay. Level 2, we're still calling it spontaneous behavior. But now, level 1, it's full and goal-directed, okay? It is not reflexive or reactive at this stage anymore. Now the learner does things on purpose. He does things with intent, okay? But not yet intent to communicate. We're still, as partners, assigning meaning to that behavior. And so we still call this phase partner-perceived communication. The issue for our learner at level 2 is they're not yet demonstrating that coordinated behavior to both partner and topic. And you remember last week, we talked about where does that coordinated attention develop? Where does our learner learn about that? Anybody recall that? Where does our learner figure out about or attention or that coordinated behavior? Where does he figure all that out?
Their environment.
What about their environment? Who's giving them access to that environment?
Their communication partners.
You bet, you bet, you bet. So they are learning about this joint attention. They are learning about this coordinated behavior or coordinating behaviors in the context of shared experiences with you, with you as the communication partner, because you're the one giving access to topic. We said last week, our kids don't access their environment by themselves. Okay? And oftentimes this is because of significant orthopedic and or significant sensory impairments that prohibit them from gaining access or observing other people or observing the opportunities. Okay? So they're totally dependent on a communication partner to give them that access. And it's within that context that they learn about this coordinated behavior, which is so important to developing that intent to communicate. So for those of you guys that identified a kid at level 2, here's some goals to consider. Expanding their means of responding that serve to attract attention or reinstate desired interactions. Demonstrate if they're familiar to him. So increasing vocabulary, if you will, increasing topic, reinstating desired interactions initiated by a partner, and increasing attention to partner and topic, joint attention. All of those are measurable or could be written as measurable objectives. If we had another hour or two, we could sit down and do that, you guys. But I guarantee you, if you have a baseline, you can write an objective from that, okay? Expanding means of responding. Well, your baseline would suggest that he has a means right now, and you're saying, let's develop more means or strategies. Demonstrating preferences for topics. Right now, he has interest in 1 or 2 topics, okay? So I want to, by the end of the year, allow him to demonstrate an environment that exposes him to a variety of topics and expand his preferences for them. So from 2 to 5 or 2 to 6 or 2 to 10, okay? And so on and so forth. These can be written as measurable objectives. Okay. Again, what sorts of things might they be interested in? I'm not going to take the time to go over this one. I think if you read it there, it'll be pretty self-explanatory. Okay. If we have time, we can come back to it. Okay. Sarah Blackstone has offered us this very, very simple communication signal inventory. Simply matter of posting this on the wall, and what does the communicator do? Write down the different behaviors that you think the learner is using as signals for communication. Write down what you think that behavior means, and write down how you respond to that behavior. You're basically developing here a glossary or a dictionary of not signs or words or pictures, but of pre-symbolic gestures that you believe that learner uses as a way to communicate. Here's one that I post in classrooms once in a while. And it's more about keeping my staff on their toes, letting them know that they're not there simply to take care of and do to the children, but they're there to interact with and be potential communication partners with the child. And that doesn't happen if you don't have the expectation. And that doesn't happen if you don't provide the opportunity. this is not rocket science, you guys. Very, very straightforward. Engage, pause, look, and assess whether or not that learner is doing something that indicates to you that they would like that to happen again. So, what did you do to interact with the child? What did the child do to let you know or to tell you, let's do that again? Okay. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But this is our level 2 child. Watch this video.
Huh? Well, we do rockabye? Who rockabye? You rockabye. Show me. Show me. Show me. Which rockabye? Oh, you want row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 merrily. Life is but a dream. Oh, good job. Which rockabye? Let's do rockabye. Ready? Rockabye. Rockabye, Brian, on the treetop. Come on up. When the wind blows, Brian will rock. When the bow breaks, the cradle will fall. Good job. And down. Come, Brian. Come on up. Up, 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 up. Cradle and all. What should we do? More rockabye? Oh, okay, more rockabye. Rockabye, Brian, on the treetop. Keep pushing. Good job. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bow breaks, the cradle will fall. Come on up, come on up. Good job. And down will come Brian, cradle and all. Oh, big work today. Big work. Talk. Talk. What should we do? Rockabye, okay. Rockabye, Brian. Oh, on the treetop. Push. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. Come on up, buddy. Come on up. Ah. When the bow breaks, the cradle will fall. And down will come Brian. Come on up. Come on. Oh, you're getting tired. Cradle and all. We won't do that one again. You're getting tired on that. Up nice and tall. Should we do row, row? Row, row? Nice row, row. Okay. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, merrily, merrily. Oh, bring me right up. Attaboy. And life is but a dream. Head up, please. Attaboy. Attaboy. Yeah. More row, row? Brian? Got it. Why don't we take a break on that?
All right. So, you think that's the first time Brian ever did those activities with his physical therapist?
No.
Absolutely not. Repeated exposure, right? Lots of experience, lots of predictability.
No, because he knew how to signify what he wanted, and no, he seemed to understand what he needed to do to repeat the choice.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, he was developing very, very specific vocabulary. I move my body this way and I get more rockabye. I move my body this way and I get more row-row. I don't do anything and I get a break, right? Which is what we saw at the very end here. Okay? Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Robin, the physical therapist here, initiated the interaction. She inserted pauses and gave Brian the opportunity to indicate somehow that this is what he wanted to have this happen again. And you know that this did not start out with Brian repeating part of the movement to say, I want to do that again. It probably started out with him smiling and Robin taking that as, oh, you did like that. Let's do it again. And over time, Brian was beginning to develop these associations. Interaction to use as signals. Okay? And I would guarantee you that he is learning a lot about Robin, his physical therapist, learning that she is a good person to be with, that she is responsive to me. And similarly, Robin's learning a lot about Brian and the sorts of things that float his boat, if you will, okay, that motivate him. Remember what John McDonald said of the slide last week. Shared experiences provide us with information that we can build on in promoting our learners' competencies, okay? These reinstatement activities, reinstatement basically means that we as communication partners are initiating the interactions and we're inserting these pauses to give our learner opportunity to great, okay? Reinstate, cause to happen again, yeah? Werner and Kaplan talk about reinstatement, and that's level 2. If you look at level 2 on the matrix, it's not saying the child is going to initiate an interaction. It is saying that given an opportunity, having been engaged in a particular object or a social interaction, the learner will indicate his desire to continue that or gain more of that interaction, okay? Or that object, okay? So Werner and Kaplan suggest that before our learners can make choices or to express preferences, they have to know what's out there. They have to know what's available. And this is how we're teaching them about what's available, okay? They call it decontextualizing, okay? Before our learner can say, hey, you know what? To know is it's out there, okay? So we tell them what's out there. We show them what's out there. We share their world with them in this sort of a way. So think about it. Reinstatement interactions helps to establish a relationship with that child. If you do things with this child in this manner and he enjoys those things, what do you think he's going to think about you?
Positive.
Yep, you're going to be on his Christmas card list, I guarantee it, okay? If that learner is every time that learner responds and the thing goes again, what do you think he's going to begin to figure out about his behavior?
You're going to give him opportunities to have a say and an early response. They want to keep communicating with you.
Absolutely, they're going to want to keep communicating with you. And to the second question, they're going to learn that their behavior matters, right? That, wow, look what I can cause to happen, okay? And finally, for so many of our learners, these kinds of interactions help to provide them with access to their environment. Brian could no more have done row, row, or rockabye by himself than, you know, you fill in the blank, right? But in the context of an interaction with you, in this case with Ron, he has 2 experiences, those sensory motor experiences. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. Sharing of a common world is essential for a communicative relationship. It allows you to learn from the child about his ideas and motivations. And it allows you to build on the child's experiences. Oh, so I guess we didn't talk about that last week. Here's that slide that I was just referencing, John McDonald. There's a lot of benefit to spending this time. It's not only giving them access to topic, but it's allowing you access to them and to how they learn. Okay. Here I am sharing an interaction with a youngster. I haven't seen her in 2.5 years. And realized to do this with her, they said, well, you know, she doesn't really like bubbles. We're not even sure she can see them. So you guys be the judge of that. And you guys focus on the opportunities for sharing this experience that we're developing here. Okay, think about the opportunities to establish or to learn about joint attention that we're creating in this interaction. You have more noise than okay. This way. Oh, get it. I wonder. Ready? I know. Right? Yes. Hey. Want to do this? Wow, that was nice. Hi. Yeah. Should we try it again? Okay, ready? Phew. Okay. Oh. Should we put it back in? Okay, here it comes. I know. How cool, huh? What? Ready? She tried. Oh, too much. Too much. Ouch. Hey, you try again. Ready? Okay, put it in. Come on, dude. Here, slide your hand up, would you? Okay, slide your hand. Okay, here comes. Oh, poof. Nice. That was a. Oh. Alright, okay. Yeah, I wondered, did you do that on purpose? Not bad. Okay. Yeah, good. Should we try it again? I'm game. I'm game. Okay, here it comes. Ready? Oh, I gotta get it out. Oh. You guys sit up. Okay. Oh. 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 Get it. Get it. Get it. Yeah, boy, you do it. You know. See that? Look at that. Isn't that cool? And what? Yep. There it is. This? Should we try that? Okay. Oh, I like this, Jess. Oh, Where'd they go? I know. Where'd they go? That's that. And, wow.
There you go.
Okay, here comes. Goodness. Yep, that's the one. Last time you got a hold of that, I couldn't get it in the jar. Okay, we got that. And we got that. Yep, got that. Mm-hmm. Are we done with this? Yeah, I think
She
maybe.
needs to drink it.
Yeah. To put that, that's pretty neat. So do you think that was a shared experience? Or at least had the makings of one?
The first comment that came in during the video is she can most definitely see those bubbles. And
Yeah.
then and Bonnie says she most certainly did like the bubbles. Her eye gaze was attentive. She reached for your hand and the bubbles to indicate more. She nodded her head and made noises for more when you stopped.
All right.
And
All
Susan
right.
says definitely.
Yeah. There was a fair bit of attention to the bubbles, and there was some attention to her communication partner. And I think on occasion, she was combining the two pieces. So this is the first time that I've had this interaction with her. As I said, first time in 2.5 years. I think she did pretty well. I think that this is the sort of interaction that is going to go a long ways to helping her develop that joint attention that we talked about. That coordinated attention between topic and communication partner. All right?
Here's a question.
Yeah, and yeah.
Were you trying to shape the opportunity for her to participate from the beginning? It was so interesting to see how she indicated more by grabbing wand and bottle.
Right. Yep. Oh, very definitely. My intent from the very beginning was to really create an opportunity for her to direct behavior to me and to topic. That was my intent from the beginning. Yeah, she's a great example of a kid at level 2 who has volitional behavior, has purposeful behavior. She sees what she wants, she's reaching for it, absolutely. But within that in the context of this interaction, I wanted to expand that attention to also her communication partner. Okay? Because what was she going to do with the bubbles by herself? I don't think that she quite had the idea yet that she needed to blow them in order to cause them to happen. So yeah, my intent here was to really focus on creating an opportunity for that joint attention to occur. Does that make sense?
She says thank you.
You bet. Okay. At level 2, we see intentional behavior. The receiver's role is to engage this learner in reciprocal back and forth interaction, and primarily to be the initiator of these interactions, pausing within the context of them to give that learner an opportunity to express interest, perhaps express preference, to reinstate the desired interactions. While we're doing this, we're helping that learner establish, through these repeated experiences, preferences. Remember, last week, I know we did talk about this last week. Last week, we talked about the fact that our learners aren't going to decide they like something simply this time, right? Or they've tried it one time, right? It has to happen over time. It has to happen through repeated experiences, okay? And before our learners can say, yeah, you know what, I like that, they have to know what that is, right? And they figure out what that is based on those experiences. And hopefully, we see our learners begin to develop differentiated ways of responding. I mean, much like you saw with Brian. I move my body this way, I get this. I move my body this way, I get this. It stands for this. Developing these early associations, which certainly lay the groundwork for understanding that something can stand for something else, which is what symbolic communication is really all about. All of this is going to move our learner in the direction of intentionally communicative behavior, which is level 3 and level 4, right? Really where all those 4 elements come together, where that learner is not only responding to, but now initiating interactions with a communication partner, behavior directed to somebody around specific topics, and doing so in a way that is doable for them, recognizable for you, okay? And it may be unconventional. It may be hand guiding. It may be handing you something that they want to talk about. Or it may be conventional, pointing to, gesturing at, looking at and looking back at you, nodding their head, yes, shaking their head, no. But regardless of whether it's level 3 or level 4, we're talking about intentionally communicative behavior at this next level. This is the level that I called party time. This is the level that Yoder and Warren referred to as that pivotal juncture of coordinated attention, And they said it is second to none in the development of a learner's early communication. It's a big deal. And again, it's where all 4 pieces, all 4 elements of communication really come together: sender, receiver, topic, and means of expression. At this stage, the learner directs behavior to a receiver with an identifiable message. That's what's very different than level 2. The learner does things on purpose at level 2, but it is not necessarily directed to a communication partner, or if it is, the topic, the message is not yet clear. Here we see those pieces come together. Okay? The focus of our intervention at this stage is to shape non-conventional gestures into conventional gestures if possible, and if not, begin to lay the groundwork towards symbolic communication use, okay, or symbol use. Okay, so some goals. For those of you who have learners at this level, think about these goals. Increase their initiations and responses to interactions. Increase their strategies for establishing and maintaining joint attention around an identifiable message. Expand their means of expression, and that might mean moving them towards more conventional gestures. Perhaps even begin to demonstrate one-to-one correspondence between a symbol and the thing that it stands for. It will include at this stage the ability to make choices, which would require their ability to discriminate between objects. If you present more than one object at a time in an array of objects or symbols, they determine one from another, right? And the greater the size of the array, the more likely some of those objects will share features in common, which makes the task of discriminating them more difficult. And remember, they learn about the key attributes of the characteristics of these different objects and these different interactions in the context of shared experiences with you. So all the time, you guys, that you are interacting with them around a variety of topics, you are doing communication. You are doing communication intervention. It's not just about teaching them some form, is it? All right. Oops. All right, here you go. Here's a guy that I think has it figured out. You tell me.
There he goes. Oh, you want help? You want to go in? There you go. What do you want to do? I need a pencil tomorrow. What do you want to do? Oh, you need help? What do you want help with? What? Oh, you want the light off? I don't know. He's looking up at the light. Grab my hand. Do you need help? To do what? Oh, want the machine on. Good job. Good job. Uh-oh, what happened, Fernando? He's looking at me, Phil, and then looking at the bubble machine.
There he goes.
Okay, here. Oops. Hold on, sweetie. Hold on. Come here, Fernando. He's pushing me away. There. I couldn't tell if he was looking through me or at me. Like, you know. So.
I did.
Whoa. Macaroni and cheese.
Good job. Good job.
No, we're not using our hands. We're using the spoon. Fernando.
Sorry.
Watch her. Fernando.
Yay. Oh, where are you going? Where are you going?
Right. Look. Fernando. Fernando.
Where are you going?
See what he tries to engage you to.
Sit up again. Sit up again. Ready? Sit up.
Okay, you want your milk. Let me do it again.
Good job, Elisa. Good job.
Oh, okay.
Yay,
There you go.
Yay, Elisa. What's the matter?
Sorry.
Jessica says watch the
Oh,
movies.
okay. Fernando. You're excited, huh? What do you want? Yay!
Do you think Fernando had joint attention? In other words, did he engage a partner and the topic?
Yes.
And how did he do that?
He seemed to attend to several things at once.
But remember, joint attention is about attention to both the topic and the partner. So how did Fernando demonstrate?
He asked the partner to help him get what he wanted.
And how did he do that?
Physical prompts by taking her hand,
Yeah.
by directing the partner to help, and then using the object he was able to obtain.
Okay. Why do you suppose in this very last instance here at the toy cupboard, she didn't respond to him? It was pretty clear what he wanted, wasn't it? But she didn't open the toy cupboard. Why do you suppose that she didn't? Any thoughts?
He did not take her hand to indicate.
But then he didn't say why. He didn't take her hand to the cupboard door, did he? So he got one piece of it. He said, "Hey, you," but it was not clear, or it needed to be more clear as to what it was that he wanted to talk about. That's the whole reason we put those plexiglass doors on the toy cupboards, was to make the topics accessible to them, visually accessible to them, but physically inaccessible until they gained access to somebody. Okay? Oops. Can I back up there? Maybe not. But before I talk about this, let me tell you how we did that. This little guy, for example, to the room with all the lights in it. Okay? You go to that door, to that room, and sign more, or an approximation of the sign for more. Now, do you suppose that in and of itself is a demonstration of joint attention? Is he in that act demonstrating all four elements of communication? He's established topic, right? He's gone to the door to the light room. He has a means of expression, which is an approximation for the sign for more. But I think something's missing.
One person says no, there is no clear indication of what more he wants.
Okay. What else is missing?
He is not indicating to a partner.
Yes. Yep, somehow that sign for more by itself is perceived as this magical key to unlocking these doors, figuratively speaking, but in literally here, right? So Fernando hasn't yet figured out that he needs to direct that behavior to somebody in order for it to be an effective communication, right? So what we did was we posted a little note by the door to that room, the door. That said, when a child is close to this door, you come over and stand next to him. Be physically available to him and wait. And look for that child to take your hand or somehow to engage you to indicate what it is that they want. If they don't, then demonstrate to them, for them, what you can do, i.e., open the door and then close the door again and wait next to him. So now you've modeled the behavior. And at that point, wait and allow that child to, again, put it to the door, or take your hand to the toy cupboard to open the toy cupboard. And if they don't, then physically assist them to open the door and allow them access. Pretty simple, 3 steps, 3 steps. And it was all initiated by the child. So when the child approaches the door, when the child approaches the toy cupboard, okay? Make yourself physically available. Within 2 weeks, Fernando was doing this independently, okay? Much more effective from a communication standpoint than going over to a closed door and signing more to it, yeah? All right. Okay, so here, in this example, Elizabeth is non-ambulatory. She's not going to be able to hop into a pony walker and scoot over and grab her partner's hand. But what she does have, which you saw Nyland learn earlier on, that when I hit this switch, I get attention from somebody else. And so she now has access to that switch regardless of where she is and what she's doing. It's available to her all the time, okay? So Elizabeth hits that switch and her teacher comes over and says, "Hi, I heard you call." Okay? Whoops, whoa. At that point, the teacher says, "Hey, Elizabeth, do you want to do this or do you want to do this?" And we call it arm fluffing and leg fluffing. So you guys can write that down and you guys can use those if you want to, but arm fluffing and leg fluffing. So she's giving Elizabeth a choice. Do you want this or do you want this? Okay. Elizabeth then repeats part of the movement associated with the interaction she wants, and they play that together. They do that together. Okay?
Philip, here's a question.
Yep.
So 2 weeks later, was he going up to the adult and signing directly at the person?
Nope. Nope, he was not signing at all. He was taking them by the hand. I think what we figured out was that sign was simply a motor behavior. He had learned a motor behavior and that somehow I magically do this and things happen. He never paired that sign with somebody else. So we abandoned that altogether. That was not our target. Think about it. The sign for more is level 6. And what Fernando was demonstrating in his behavior was level 2. A huge competencies were, and what signing more was targeting, which was level 6. And simply by signing more, we were not teaching him, we were not creating an environment that really reinforced what it was that he needed at that moment, which was, I need to direct my behavior to somebody else. Okay? And so for us, our feeling was the best way to do that was to teach him, to really encourage him to physically access his communication partner. I guess what I was mostly responding to was the huge disconnect between teaching him a sign which is level 6, and seeing where he's operating, which is level 2. Exposing them to it receptively, but that is certainly not my objective expressively at that time. Okay? That help? Or does that work? Oh, here he goes. He gets a little chance, another shot at this.
Fernando, you're excited, huh? What do you want? Yay! What do you want? Oh, okay, you want me to help you open the door.
Okay, there you go. So here's a copy of, or here's an example of that list I was describing to you. Very simple. Bring him, boom. And the only data I was looking for was independent or assisted. And we were using this strategy across 3 different children, so those are represented by D, F, and S, their initials, okay? Again, part of my objective in posting this kind of thing on the wall in a very visible, very constant place is to shape adult behavior as well, not just kid behavior. And it's to reinforce the idea that we are there as potential communication partners, not simply as people doing for our learners. Does that make sense? All right. So at level 3 or 4, our learners are at that intentional, pre-symbolic communication level, meaning that they are engaging another person with a clear message in mind, identifiable message, okay? The receiver's job now is different. We're no longer interpreting so much as we are responding to that learner's behavior. We are available, but we are waiting for that sender to engage. At this point, the learner has had a lot of experience with things in his environment, so it may be fair from objects or interactions, okay? Because now he has enough information upon which to make an informed choice. But if you offer him things that he has never seen before and say, what do you want? Hey, that's not really a fair question. He has no idea. Their means of expression may be idiosyncratic, it may be unique to them, it may be unconventional, or it may be conventional. Why might a learner not develop a large repertoire of conventional behaviors? Think about it. Think about the kids we're talking about. Why might some children not develop pointing or waving or beckoning or
Physical limitations.
Yep.
They can't see it happening around them.
Yep. Good, good, good. So, given that, if a child has that intent to communicate, but he's using unconventional gestures to do that, are you going to go ahead and insist that he move to level 4 before he can go on into symbolic communication? Or are you going to rather consider, is he doing this for a variety of topics? Is he really ready to move to symbolic communication, regardless of the form of his unconventional gestures?
Yes, the latter.
Yeah, the latter. You bet. You bet. So as we move into symbolic communication, which will be the topic for next week, we're really going to start focusing on what type of symbol makes the most sense to our learner right now, and to ensure that as they develop these symbols, as we say that they understand what the symbol means, they are demonstrating that one-to-one correspondence between the symbol and the referent. Okay? I think, holy smokes, we did it. It is 6 o'clock. Well, yes, it is. 5 o'clock your time. So I can't believe we actually got through 73. A lot of you guys, but I hope that you were able to identify a particular objective for your child, for the child you have in mind. If not, go back and review your notes. If not, go back and look at your handouts. There are objectives that for you to consider that might be appropriate if you have accurately identified what level of communicative competence that learner's at right now. Okay? Unless there's some pressing question, I think we're a wrap.
Phil, thank you. Wonderful as usual, and wonderful information. And, I've heard you a lot of times, and I learn something every time that you speak. So thanks for sharing all of that. I'm looking forward to next week. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and remind you to complete the evaluation. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. So thank you all. Good night.
And thank you guys for the opportunity. This was great.
Bye.
Bye-bye.